So today, first, I wanted to talk to you initially a little bit about what Icon Group is and what we do and how that came about over the past 20 years, and then also go into some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. So Icon Group is Australia's largest provider of integrated cancer care services. We provide medical oncology, radiation oncology, pharmacy services and chemotherapy compounding services to patients throughout Australia, across all those dots that you can see there. We're also the largest provider of medical oncology services in Singapore, and we do outreach services through into a number of Southeast Asian countries from there. We have clinics in New Zealand, and we have a number of partnerships underway in China. It's a big business these days. You know, there's over 3,000 people who work across the group, and 10 of whom are here. Thank you so much for coming. And it is a big and significant business that in the last year it treated provided treatments to over 2 million patients. So we're impacting on a lot of lives. But 20 years ago, when Stuart and I first started, that's not us. For those of you, there's one small but significant difference there. For those of you who can see Stuart, he hasn't had hair like that for, well, certainly as long as I've known him. Oh, that's fair. But we are both pharmacists by background, and still are pharmacists. And 20 years ago, this year actually, we started our pharmacy business together. We got engaged on a Wednesday and we bought our first pharmacy on the Monday. We bought 4 pharmacies in 3 states over the next 3 months and went from employees 1 and 2 to having 100 people as part of our team by Christmas that year, building everything from scratch. We had no finance department, we had no HR department, we had no IT department. We did everything, and we literally were flying the plane as we were still building it. So that was an enormous learning curve and a big learning exercise for us. What we were doing then was looking at providing pharmacy services in a different way to the way that they were currently being provided to the aged care industry and the private hospital industry. We didn't do any retail pharmacy work. We were purely focused on making a difference in that area of our professional services sector. So that went along quite well. You know, there were a lot of swings and roundabouts along the way. It saw us move to Queensland and form our base here. We merged that business that was in 1998 that we started. We merged that business in 2002 with a similar pharmacy company based here in southeast Queensland that had 4 older partners who were all looking to retire and saw us as their succession program. So that was all kicking along quite well, really. We got to 2007, and by that stage we had quite a big and significant pharmacy business in that area of expertise across the country. And Easter Thursday 2007, we got a call from our largest client, who at that stage was responsible for about 60% of our revenue and our profitability. And they said, look, we've been blocked from expanding any further by the ACCC. We can't buy any more hospitals. We can't build any more hospitals. But we need to keep delivering on revenue growth for our shareholders. So we're actually looking at what we currently outsource that we can take in-house to do that. And pharmacy's top of our list, so we're actually going to not re-sign any of your pharmacy contracts as they fall due over the next 18 months, and we're going to take all of that in-house. So anyway, have a nice Easter, and we'll talk further on Monday. So needless to say, it wasn't the most relaxing of Easters. There was no way that the business could actually survive in that form. There was no option to say, let's actually just look and see whether we can find some other hospitals that we can be the service provider to. It actually wasn't sustainable going forward there. So we had to really turn our attention to, well, what have we got? What have we got of value, and what can we create of value to ensure that by this time, not just us, but the 300 people who were working in the business and who depended on their employment for paying their own mortgages, looking after their own families, also had roles that they could continue on with. Not to mention the patients that were under our care and the services that were still being delivered across the remainder of the business. So we looked at what we were doing and figured out that we identified there were 2 clear paths. We looked at the statistics around what was happening in the Australian healthcare sector and what was projected to happen over the next 20 years. And the ageing population meant that the first opportunity that presented for us was that in our aged care pharmacy business, we were using technology to produce medication compliance packs for the patients in the nursing homes that we looked after. And we realised that as more and more people were getting older and living at home for longer, there was a need for them to access similar medication support in their homes. So we thought, well, if we take that product and we turn that into a manufacturing business and then get a TGA licence for it, we can potentially then sell that product to any pharmacy in Australia for them to be able to deliver to their patients. So that was the project that I led then, and we took that we took that technology, we built, what you don't know, and we thought, it can't be that hard to build a manufacturing plant and get a TGA licence. I'm sure we'll be okay. But we found some good people to work with us along the way, and we did that. And then in 2012, I think I'm pointing this in the wrong direction, we actually sold that business to one of the pharmacy wholesalers in Australia and exited from there. But we did that for a very, very specific purpose, because you might remember I said that we identified 2 opportunities back then in 2007, and the second of those was in cancer care. We were doing quite a lot of cancer care pharmacy at that stage. Cancer care is an area where the pharmacist is really heavily involved in healthcare. The doses are very complicated. The side effects are quite severe. It's really important to have pharmacists very, very actively involved in the provision of cancer care services. So we set off on an dual pathway where, while I was doing the manufacturing piece, Stuart was actually leading the business through really further developing our skills and our expertise in cancer care pharmacy, with a view that if we built that out further, the opportunity would likely arise where we could actually move into not just being the pharmacy provider, but the owner and operator of the centres delivering those services. And even then, back in 2007, we were crucially aware that while Australia's population was growing and ageing, on our doorstep, Asia had a really, really looming need for a huge number of projected increases in the number of people who were going to be diagnosed with cancer, and a need for good and quality services to be able to deliver treatment to them. So the reason that we actually sold the manufacturing business was the opportunity. Oops, gone too far there. The reason that we sold the manufacturing business was that the opportunity had presented in 2012 to buy a set of cancer care hospitals that we were the pharmacy provider to in southeast Brisbane. In southeast Queensland rather. And so we sold the manufacturing business to get the capital to make that acquisition. And we bought those hospitals in conjunction with a number of the doctors who owned them at the time. They stayed on as shareholders, but we took over those hospitals and the running of those hospitals, and that was where Icon really, really started. But we knew that radiation oncology was something that we wanted to be able to add in, as well as medical oncology, and it's a very, very expensive business to get into. The linear accelerators cost millions of dollars. Our personal balance sheet was certainly never, ever going to be able to fund that. So we knew that we needed a partner who could actually help us to deliver on that next opportunity. And in 2014, we sold a share in the business to Quadrant Private Equity that was a Sydney-based PE firm, and were able to utilise their funds and the balance sheet strength that they provided to be able to bring a radiation oncology group into the business, which not only brought the technology and the service expansion, also brought a fantastic group of people alongside it. Again, another Southeast Queensland founded business, and the CEO and co-founder of the radiation oncology business that we acquired is actually now the CEO of Icon Group overall, Mark Middleton. So we also bought a chemotherapy compounding manufacturing business and brought that into the group, and made the acquisition of the clinics in Singapore that got us started underway there. So the window of investment that Quadrant was involved with, mucking up this clicker. This period, that 3-year window while we had Quadrant as partners, was a time of extraordinary growth and expansion. They were fantastic partners, and we worked really, really well with them, and we achieved a lot, and the group grew exponentially, and the number of patients that we were able to provide services to increased exponentially as well. But as soon as you sign the ink on a deal with a PE company, the clock immediately starts ticking on the duration of that relationship, because it's determined by their funds all have a limited lifespan, and their investors are looking for their money to be returned. So you know that you've got generally a 3 to 5 window that you're actually going to be working with those people before that time comes to an end. So early last year, late the year before, we started having those conversations with Quadrant around that time was coming to an end, and we needed to figure out who we were actually going to be working with going forward, who our new partners were going to be. We loved working with Quadrant, but we could see that the next 3 to 5 years was really going to be very heavily focused on Asia, and we needed to have somebody who, as well as having that Australian expertise, was also going to be able to help us in those markets. So in September last year, we settled on a transaction that saw Quadrant exit and a consortium led with Goldman Sachs out of Hong Kong, QIC, the Queensland Investment Corporation based in Brisbane, and Pagoda in China actually become our new partners. And that transaction was the one that valued the business at over $1 billion. And while it's never been about the value or the numbers, if you get headlines like that, you've got to take the chance to put yourself in a cheeky unicorn Bitmoji suit and have a bit of fun with it, because it's not something that happens every day. So that's a quick run through of the last 20 years. And I am conscious that, doing that sort of in a 10 to 15 minute window gives a bit of an impression that it's really kind of all been like that. When the reality is, anybody who's actually had a business knows that a business journey has a lot more squiggles than just a straight line. And so what I want to talk a little bit now is about what some of those squiggles were that we encountered along the way, how we navigated our way through them, and hopefully if that means that some of you need to leave a little less flesh on the fence than we have along the way, then that might be helpful. So this next bit, again, we go back to the Bitmojis, and just to put that into context, we travel a lot with what we do, and we've got 2 teenagers, and communication is everything, and you've got to find the communication style that works for you. And in our family, we use Bitmojis all the time. So we've got Bitmojis for everything, and everybody sends. I haven't included the one that I use the most, which is me with a hammer going overruled, which is normally in response to a request from other teenagers, and they know that if it's an ambit claim, they're just going to get back the hammer and overruled. But if you're wondering why the next few slides are all about the Bitmojis, that's the context for that. So I think the first thing, and this was a lesson that we learnt very, very early on, you have to know your numbers. You have to know where your money's coming from and where your money's going to. And if you don't know that, you really, particularly when you're starting out, you're really significantly limiting your chances of success. You don't necessarily have to be responsible for the preparation of the numbers, but all too often I see founders who go, the numbers bore me. The numbers bore me so much. I'm not into the numbers. I'm all about the doing. And I just shudder when I hear that, because you have to know the numbers. If you know where challenges are coming, particularly, cash flow is the most important business and financial statement that you'll ever have, particularly in your early days. And when Stuart and I were first starting out, that rapid growth, when we had those 4 pharmacies and we were writing new contracts every day, we had 100 people whose wages we had to pay. We absolutely had to know what was coming in. And back then, the way in pharmacy that you got your money, you got a cheque at the end of the month, 1 cheque. And that was, aside from the patient accounts, 95% of our revenue came in that 1 cheque. If we didn't know what we had to pay out and whether that cheque was going to cover it or not, it all could have been over a lot long time ago. So the importance of knowing your numbers, and I think often, particularly when I'm talking to women, a lot of women, in corporate roles particularly, position themselves into roles where they don't have responsibility for the numbers. You know, if you might be in marketing or HR or one of those areas where you don't actually have, you know, you have your costs going out, but you don't actually have a revenue line coming in. And I always encourage young women to get themselves into places in the business where they actually have an accountability for a P&L, because it's a really, really important part of learning, particularly if you've got aspirations to run a business yourself. You do need to know those numbers, because it will come back to bite you if you don't. Next one is a plan. You know, you have to know, if you want to have a chance of getting to where you want to go, you have to know how you're going to get there. Hope is not a plan. Just actually putting it out there, I want to achieve this. If you don't actually have a defined way of getting there, not really that great chance that you're going to find yourself there. So you have to have a plan. It doesn't mean that you can't deviate from that plan. There has to be enough flexibility in it that when things happen that you didn't see or forecast happening, you can't just go, no, the plan was we would do this. You have to be able to adjust. But one of the challenges for entrepreneurs in particular is there's always bright, shiny objects being thrown up in front of you. And it's very, very easy to get distracted by the bright, shiny objects and move away from the things that you actually need to be focusing on, because that can get a bit boring. And you're like, oh, you know, that was so exciting when I had an idea, but now the execution of it, the rush isn't there anymore, so I want to move on to something else. And that's a real danger for entrepreneurs. So committing to a plan and then actually delivering on that plan is something that's absolutely key. It's fine to be flexible and adaptable, but if you find yourself doing more pivots than a prima ballerina, you need to have a bit of a look about, am I actually got the ability to execute on what I want to do here? If we hadn't had a really defined plan that all the way through from milestone targets through to all the financial metrics associated with that, when we had that issue that I've talked about earlier, when that hospital partner left us in 2007, something else fairly major happened in 2008 while we were underway with building the manufacturing plant and buying all of the additional oncology pharmacies and repositioning the business. The GFC hit and we were up to our eyeballs in debt, up to our eyeballs. It was not a good place to be, because pre the GFC, the banks would give you money for anything. The world changed overnight, and we were lucky initially that they had bigger problems than us to deal with, but it was hard. It was brutally, brutally hard. And the thing that actually got us through that time was we had a plan, and we showed that we had an ability to execute on that plan. And while the plan showed that things were continuing to get worse as those last hospital contracts exited before the new businesses that we were building started to come up the other side, the banks really weren't terribly excited by the fact that we were continuing to deliver on the plan. They would have liked to have maybe seen a pivot and one that turned into better results. But it did actually build confidence. It showed that we knew that was what was happening and we had the capability to deliver on it. And once we actually started delivering on the part that saw things come up, everyone got a bit more relaxed. But if we hadn't actually had the discipline and the focus to lock into that plan, again, could have been a very different story. Speaking of focus and discipline, strengths and knowing the things that you're good at is absolutely key. Back in early 2008, pre the GFC, we actually did a Gallup strengths training exercise with, I think, about the top 50 people at that time across the organisation, identifying through the Gallup scientific process what it was that they had a natural talent at and what they were good at, and also what were the things that they actually had no natural talent at. And we often find that personally and in performance reviews, we spend so much time focusing on the things that we know we're not good at and trying to get better. But what this program actually did was shone a whole new light on looking at that by saying, if you've got no natural talent, you can put so much effort and energy into trying to be better. You're only ever going to get from pretty poor to maybe mediocre. And nobody ever achieved anything great by being mediocre. Whereas if you acknowledge the things that you're not good at, surround yourself with people who can compensate for that, and you focus your time and energy on the things that you have a natural talent for, that's when the magic happens. And that's when you have the chance to actually be exceptional at those things. And it was confronting. We did all of the, you have to answer hundreds and hundreds of online questions and then it spits out. And these were my top 5 strengths that came back. And I read it and I've gone, I don't really like that very much. It makes me sound a bit anal and a bit rigid and not all that much fun. And Stuart looked at it and he goes, looks pretty spot on to me. But again, knowing the way that you're wired and knowing the things that are your skills is very empowering. And I'd really encourage people to not only know what they're good at, know what they're bad at, own the things that you're not good at, and make sure that you've got compensatory mechanisms in place for them, rather than actually trying to put all your time, effort and energy into getting better at them. Values. Values is so important to us. It always has been, before we even knew what they were. Back in the early days, we didn't have defined values. We knew what we were about, and we knew we wanted people who brought a positive energy to everything that they did. We wanted them to focus on the delivery of exceptional healthcare. We wanted them to bring innovative thinking to what they were doing, and we were passionate about building value-adding relationships, not just one-way partnerships. Once things got a little bit more sophisticated, I guess, we captured those into actual value statements. And these were the Epic value statements. If you see, you can actually see EPIC. It's how we named the company. We named the pharmacy business after our values. That's how deeply embedded they are in everything that we do. And that's carried across into Icon, where those same core values hold true: energy, on purpose, because we always like to have it so it spells as well, and there's no P in Icon, so we added in the O there. And we also added in another really important value around nurture, because we are caring for people at if not the most challenging, certainly one of the most challenging times of their lives. And the beautiful nurturing care that our team give to our patients at that time is something that really is something we're incredibly proud of. We get wonderful feedback from patients and patients' families all the time around that. So it was really important. It's a very different value to the energy value, and we wanted to make sure that we had a mechanism to be able to acknowledge that. And again, it worked in nicely with the N in Icon. So now, as well as about being epic, we're also very much about being iconic. Leaving now. That's not my sign to get off. I think I've still got a few more minutes. This is about exit strategies and the importance of knowing where your exit might be. No matter what your intention is when you start a business, and I see a lot of people who start businesses and go, no, I'm never going to want to sell this business or leave this business. This is my baby. I'm so passionate about it. Sometimes that choice isn't always yours for the making. And if you haven't actually thought about what your exit strategy is early enough, you might find that you're actually really hamstrung when you need one. You need to have your business structured so it actually is transactable, and that can be about making sure that you've actually got the right legal entities, the right financial entities set up and set in place. And the earlier you do that, the better, because the harder it is to do the longer you leave it. We've bought and sold a lot of businesses over the course of the last 20 years, and there's been some businesses that we would have liked to have bought that have essentially been unable to be transacted, particularly in the pharmacy space, because the proprietor has had them so deeply embedded with their personal financials, and there's no clean records. Everything's all mashed in together. You know, the mortgage in their house might be tied in, associated with their business loans and things. And sometimes you do actually have to walk away because that business just actually isn't able to be transacted. So it's really important to think about what your leaving strategy actually is right from the time that you set it up. You know, with the manufacturing business that we sold to the pharmacy wholesaler, we knew from the time that we started that business that that was our likely exit there. we'd seen similar overseas models that had always ended up with the wholesaler as the acquirer. We knew that shared customer base, synergies and things, that was likely to be our exit point. So we made sure that we set that business up in a way that they could, one of the pharmacy wholesalers in Australia could buy that business at an appropriate time if they wanted to. We made sure that, we weren't out there knocking on their door every 5 minutes going, hey, it's us again, anytime you want to buy us, we're here. But we made sure through working contacts in the industry that they knew what we were doing, that they knew about our successes, that we were signing more and more customers, and we kept them informed. So when the time came and we wanted to make that transaction, we actually had almost pre-prepared vendors, and we had a business that was able to be transacted. So knowing where your exit strategy is coming from is a really important consideration when you're starting out. Rocket and space. You heard when Cathie introduced me, I am in the Virgin Galactic program, and the number one question I'm always asked around that is why? Why do you want to go to space? And for me, it's different. There's a different reason for all the different people that I've met in the program. But for me, it's about seeing the world through a different perspective. And I think there's no more extreme way of seeing the world through a different perspective than actually going into space and looking back down on it. But you can look at the world through a different perspective without needing to be as extreme as going to space. And this is something, again, that we've always been really passionate about, the value of doing this throughout our business careers. If you only look at your business through the same lens every day, and if you only network and hang out with people in your own industry, you only see the same things. You don't have your ideas stretched. You don't get that, or you might, but it's a lot harder to get that inspiration spark where you go, hang on a minute, they're doing this over here. That's a totally different industry to mine, but that would work in my industry, and no one's doing it that way there yet. So I could take that idea, I can repurpose it, and I can apply it into health, and then all of a sudden that's actually something new for us, a competitive advantage, a productivity gain, something that actually sets us apart. And you don't actually get those insights if you just hang out with people who are doing the same thing as you. So actively getting out of your comfort zone, going into different environments, I go to a few healthcare conferences and events, but the vast majority of the things I go to are from industries completely different to the one that I live in on a day-to-day basis, because I want that stretch of my thinking. I want to meet those people who are different and who are not doing what I'm doing, and learn from them and bring those ideas back into what we do each day. So that's my motivation for going to space, but it is something that we've been doing for the past 20 years without actually needing to get into a rocket ship. Oops. So that's essentially a quick summary of what we've been up to over the last 20 years. The one thing that the thought that I want to leave you with is, even though the presentation's titled Building a $1 Billion Business, it was never about the money. 20 years ago when Stuart and I set out, people now say, when you've had that headline attached to you, people say, oh, was that always your plan? You wanted to build a $1 billion business? I mean, I think it was the last thing on our minds. We just wanted to actually deliver healthcare services in a different way and do something better than what we saw that was happening around us at the time. And now that's still what we're about. Our purpose at Icon Group is not about, can we become a $2 billion business? Nobody would want to sign up and be part of that. Our purpose is about, we want to deliver the best care possible to as many people as possible, as close to where they live as possible, in Australia and into Asia. That's why we do what we do. And if you stick with purpose, and you execute well on it, then you can actually build a big and successful business. But if your purpose can't be, I want to make a lot of money and I want to build a big business, you've got to have something bigger and more meaningful than that. So thank you for letting me share those thoughts with you today. I'm all over social media and the internet and everywhere else, so feel free to reach out and connect with me on any of those forums. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathie. We are going to have an on-the-couch conversation here, so please have a think about some questions that you might want to ask. So I might just sort of start with a bit of an opening question. So there's a great explanation of the journey that you've gone through in the development of your business. And one word you kept mentioning many times was partners and partnerships, but you also talked about exiting partnerships and entering new partnerships and exiting partnerships. How do you do that in a way that doesn't create conflicts? Like how do you amicably exit a long-term partnership?
I think one of the things that we've always had as a focus is around the importance of partnerships being two ways, regardless of who they're with, whether they're suppliers, whether they're business partners, whether they're banks, finance partners, and making sure that we take the time to gain an understanding of what's important to that partner and what their needs are, because then if we can actually help them to meet their needs, it improves the relationship and it increases the chance that partnership's going to be successful. If you're only focused on what you can get out of it and you have no regard for the other person, your business partnerships are not really any different to personal partnerships. If you're in a relationship and it's all one way and it's all about what's in it for you rather than thinking about the needs and the requirements of the other person, that's probably not going to be a relationship that actually ends up with a happily ever after story. And business partnerships, in our view, are no different. You've got to actually take the time to think about and understand what do the other party want to get out of it and make sure that you meet their needs while you're expecting them to meet yours.
Okay, and another thing you talked about was sort of understanding, I suppose, what you don't know and when you need help from other experts. Because, again, I mean, as you sort of said when you first described the journey, it did seem like it was a relatively straight line. And it was like, well, how did you know to do that? And then how did you know to do that? So it's almost like, well, how do you know when you need help? And then how do you get the right help? So how do you find the right people to... I mean, how did you learn about corporate structures and all those other things that you're so embedded with now?
Well, I think part of it is a bit learning by the seat of your pants as you go along. But I think too, I've been really fortunate that Stuart and I have worked together now for 20 years. We literally got engaged and started working together, and we have very different but very complementary skill sets. And, when we ran into each other in a lane in Melbourne 21 years ago, we didn't actually know that then when we did that Gallup's program back in 2008, that we would actually be scientifically assessed as being almost the perfect combination of business partners. So, and I think, I think that would have reduced some of the romanticism of the night if we'd actually said, well, how about you do this questionnaire before we decide whether we're going to go on a date or not? And so we were really fortunate in that regard, but it has meant that I've worked for the last 20 years and done what I've done with someone who's not only my best friend and my partner in every sense of the word, but it also means that you've got that person there who's also really honest with you. And if we've never been afraid of going, I don't actually think you know everything there is to know about that, and we need to get some people in who do know and who can work with us. And if you're actively out there looking, if you know the skills that you need and the expertise that you need, it's not hard to find people who can help you. And I think particularly, again, if you go into it with that partnership approach where you're not actually just trying to form a relationship with someone to suck the marrow out of them to meet all of your needs, you're thinking about how you can actually be delivering something to them in return as well. But it's about that self-awareness at the end of the day, being unafraid to put your hand up and say, I don't actually know about this. When we were doing the TGA licence for the company, I knew how to run production machines in an aged care pharmacy production environment, which I'd had to learn as well. I certainly didn't know how to turn that into a GMP licensed environment. So we went out and we found people who had those skill sets and we brought them in and we learnt from them.
Thank you. So some questions from the floor. We have a mic here. No? Well, okay, I will ask another one while we are waiting. I'm the chair of the Bond University Women's Network, and we recently had a presentation from one of our professors who's in occupational therapy, and it was all about life balance and navigating your life. And one of the things that she was quite adamant about is not to focus on work-life balance, because it makes it sound like work is over here and life is over here. So you kind of put your life on hold while you're working, and you put work on hold while you're lifing. What would you say about life balance?
I hate the term work-life balance too. I think it's something that's actually been made up by the media to make women feel guilty. No one ever asks men about work-life balance, or very rarely. You know, Stuart and I have been business partners for 20 years. We're parents to the same 2 children. Nobody ever asks him, if he goes on a business trip, who's looking after the children? Nobody ever actually says to him, how is your work-life balance going, Stuart? I mean, he's actually a lot better at balance than me. He happily will take time out when he needs it without feeling guilty about it, and that's a continual learning journey for me. But back when we first bought pharmacies in Western Australia, back in 2004, I think it would have been, Sasha had just started school with Daniel's daughters. They started prep on the same day. And we'd bought a pharmacy in Western Australia, and you had to be domiciled in Western Australia to own a business there. So for the next 4.5 years, I actually commuted to Perth every fortnight to meet that requirement and work in the pharmacies and lead the pharmacies there. People used to bring casseroles around to Stuart, and because I was away, and then I would come home on the alternate week, and then he would travel or do whatever he needed. No one ever brought me a casserole. So I think, work-life balance, I think, is made up by the media to feel guilty. But I think it's about the self-awareness, knowing what works for you, knowing what helps you actually manage the life that you want to live. And, for me, one of my key things is exercise. If I don't exercise in the morning, before the day hits, before the kids get up and before the workday starts, it does impact on me. I'm not as mentally fresh. I don't have as much energy. And I know for me, that's a key enabler allowing me to do what I do. So I think you just have to figure out what are the things that actually make you feel like life is in sync rather than in balance, because something will always be out of balance, undoubtedly. Either the kids are going haywire, or there might be an issue at work, or you just haven't got enough time in the day. There's always something that actually gets out of sync at any particular time, but you've just got to figure out what helps you do what you do the best way you can, and what are your coping mechanisms.
So I mean, what intrigued me about part of your story, it was, okay, here's the story, and this is how I created a $1 billion business. Oh, and by the way, we've got teenage children. It was sort of like, wow, how did you manage all of that, and what role did your children play? And again, sort of maybe linking it to that life balance again.
Well, I think and again, having a supportive partner in every sense of the word has always been key. But they're also, when the kids were little, we didn't have the luxury of me not being able to work. So Sasha was born in 2001, and one of my jobs in the business then was I had to work with our financial bookkeeper to do the BAS, and we needed the money coming in from the BAS. The BAS check coming in each month was a big check, and Sasha did not fit the schedule. She was born 3 weeks early. I had preeclampsia. It was all quite dramatic, and I got home from hospital and the BAS was due, and so and this is again 2001. The bookkeeper had rung me and said, I'm faxing you through all of the numbers and things that you need, and can you please, do the bit that you need to do so I can lodge the BAS? And there was no cartridge in the fax machine. And I've gone, I'm just going to duck to Officeworks and get a fax cartridge. And Stuart's like, what about the baby? And I've gone, well, I've just fed her. She's asleep in the cot. We've been home from hospital for about 15 minutes. And I said, I've fed her. She's asleep in the cot. Officeworks is 3 blocks away. I'll be back. If she does wake up, well, she's not going to die. She's not going to be starving. She only got fed half an hour ago. She'll be fine. And one of my girlfriends rang me I went adult, and she goes, "Oh, you had the baby. How are you going?" And I'm like, yeah. She goes, "What's all that noise in the background?" I said, "I'm at office work, so I've got to get a fax cartridge." And so it's fair to say I think the kids have grown up in and around the business. And in every family, your normal is your normal. And your kids adjust to what they see as normal. And for them, they've had dinner time conversations around the business. You know, when I was growing up, I thought it was normal that you had jelly crystal sandwiches on white bread for lunch on Sundays. That was what we had every week. And it was my normal. I thought that was what every family did. It was only when I got out to experience what other families did that I realised not everybody actually had jelly crystal sandwiches for Sunday lunch, and that if mum stayed late at church on that day and dad couldn't be bothered with the bread, you were really lucky and you just got the teaspoon and the box. So, but for our kids, having a mum who works and parents who will fly around the world at the drop of a hat, and that the business conversation is always present at the table, that's their normal. And it's interesting because our daughter's now in grade 11 and she's actually doing business studies, and she actually admitted to me the other day that she didn't realise how much, now that she's studying it, she didn't realise how much she actually knows just from what she's learnt along the way. And it pained her greatly to admit that because, like most teenagers, admitting that your parents actually have a clue about anything is quite a departure.
So in that answer, you mentioned your mum and dad. So what was it when you were growing up, you think, that happened that let you be you, so that you are able to do all of the things that you did in terms of not being held back by stereotypes of what girls can do and what girls can't do, I guess?
And it's funny that you asked that, because if I look back at my childhood, typically, my mum was a school teacher who, as was the expectation at the time, gave up work when she was pregnant with me and didn't ever return to work until after I went to university. So she was a stay-at-home mum for the entire time that I was at home. But my dad was an entrepreneur. Not that I knew it at the time. It's only with hindsight I've been able to look back and recognise that. He was the oldest of 7. He needed to leave school at grade 10 to start contributing to the family earnings, and he got a job as an apprentice fitter and turner at the State Electricity Commission in Victoria. But what he really wanted to do was be a farmer, but circumstances didn't allow that. So Dad decided that he wasn't actually going to let his job at the SEC, and he worked his way from an apprentice through into management there. But he wasn't going to let that hold him back, and he started earning income in every way imaginable, linked to building skills that would allow him to actually be a farmer. So he trained himself to be able... We lived in country Victoria. He trained himself to learn how to shear sheep, and there were all of these sort of little 5-acre properties around near where we lived where people had sheep to keep the grass down. And so Dad would then offer his services to go around and shear the sheep and then earn money from that. He then did fencing, he did hay baling, and then ultimately he got to the point where he started off, he leased some land and he started running cattle on it, which was what he'd always wanted to do. So I look back and I think my dad actually was an entrepreneur before it was a word, and it was around finding a way to do what he actually wanted to do, and also the work ethic. He worked so incredibly hard, and Mum supported him in that, and I guess showed us that if you work hard and you want something enough, you can achieve it regardless of what your circumstances were. And Mum was incredibly passionate about the importance of education. It was never, despite the fact, she'd gone to teachers' college, no one in Dad's family had gone to university, but it was always an expectation that put on us from an early age that we were expected to actually go to university and get a qualification that would allow us to do something different and hopefully make our life a little easier than where theirs had been.
So any questions? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. On the assumption, using your Bitmojis, that you have a plan and an exit strategy for what you're doing right now, what's next? What's the next chapter? Where are you going?
Yeah, look, I think without disclosing all of the details of it, because there are some confidentialities around that, I think again we do have that same scenario where our partners at the moment will reached the end of their investment cycle. And there's a couple of options that'll be open to us at that time. Listing is always one of them, and going into the public markets. And, as you heard in the introduction, I've been the chair of a very different business and a small cap business on the ASX and for the last 18 months or so, and that's given us a really good insight into what life in the public markets is like. That certainly then weighs into our thinking. There's always another bigger PE company around the corner as well, so you can potentially go in there. The increasing presence of our business in Asia, I think, opens up some interesting opportunities too. There's a lot of money around in those markets, and healthcare is a growth market that they've identified too. So all we know for sure, or all I can publicly say for sure at the moment, is we know that there is a plan, and we know that there are options available to us, and we know sort of the rough timeline on which they'll present. But we've always worked in that sort of 3 to 5 year forward-looking cycle ever since we started out. But there is a plan.
Hi, I just wanted to know what the best piece of advice you've received and sort of how it impacted your journey so far.
That's a good question. Probably the thing that actually really hit me for six, I think, was, and it's only a few years ago, I read Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, and particularly the discussion around impostor syndrome. And I can clearly remember I was on a plane from Melbourne to Launceston, and I was just devouring this book, and I'm going, I never knew other people thought like that. I thought it was just me. That sense of feeling like someone's actually going to expose you for not actually being worthy of having a seat at the table, or that someone's going to turn to you and go, why is she even here? What's she actually really done? And reading that and going, this is a thing. It's not actually just me. This is something that is a thing that so many other people feel, was just so powerful. And it really changed me quite dramatically to be able to have that confidence and realise that, sort of put that part of myself back into its box whenever it emerged, by understanding that it wasn't just me and I wasn't unique in feeling like that, and it actually was something that could be overcome, and a lot of other women felt the same and also had to overcome it. So that was a really, really powerful thing. And then I was running around going, oh my God, Sasha, you and your friends, you've all got to read this book. And Sasha's like, seriously? But I'm still trying to get her to read it. But I think in a couple of years' time it might have more relevance to her. But I found that just... And so much of the advice that she had around women in the workforce, and even little things, like if you're in a meeting and it's predominantly men in the meeting with you, don't fill up, no matter how thirsty you are, don't pick up the water jug. Wait for a guy to actually get thirstier than you and pick up the water jug and offer it around. Because if you pick up the water jug and fill everybody's glasses, you're immediately putting yourself into wearing the woman hat. And the next thing you know, they'll be asking you for coffee or wanting you to take the minutes of the meeting. So no matter how thirsty you are, wait for the guy to pour the water. Don't ever touch the water jug.
Hi, over here. We're both high school students, and we were just wondering, what's your drive? Like, what made you become from a pharmacist to a businesswoman?
Well, I think in retail pharmacy, where I started out, I started in retail pharmacy with a part-time job after school when I was 16. I just turned 16. My boyfriend at the time, his sister had the job that I went, and she was leaving school to go and work at Williams the Shoeman. So I marched into the pharmacy and said, I'm Deanne's brother's girlfriend and I know she's going to Williams the Shoeman, and so that means her job's coming free. Can I please have it? Because I thought it was a more fun, would be a better place to work than being in a supermarket. And Deanne told me that the hair reps would give you free Glints rinses to use. So I was like, yeah, I'm up for that. So I started work in the pharmacy then, and while retail pharmacy is a healthcare business, it's also still a retail business. And I really loved the business side of it. And, and I was quite fortunate at the time. It was around the computerisation of the industry. So I got to be involved with the implementation of the dispensary computer and then the point of sale computer. And because I got to know that business really well, my boss actually gave me an enormous amount of responsibility for someone who was 16 or 17 at the time. And I discovered then that was what I actually really loved, the business aspect of it as well as the pharmacy aspect of it. So by the time I finished my pharmacy degree, I always knew that I was actually going to run a business. At the time, I thought it might have been a retail pharmacy business, but then it ended up being a different business. But it was that very early immersion and finding out what I liked. I actually liked it, I enjoyed it, and I was good at it. And I think it's hard, and I think it's so tough, particularly for students these days, because there's such a myriad of opportunities and rapid change. To try and figure out what it is that you want to do is really, really hard. But it's much better. It's much more, I think, about finding out what you like to do and what are the things that actually get you excited to get out of bed and to go, whether it's in a part-time job or work experience or something else. Kind of have that thought in the back of your mind. What are the bits of this that I really, really like? And they're the ones to hone into because they're the clues for what it is that you actually ultimately want to find yourself doing.
Thank you.
Hi. I just wanted to talk about markets and moving the business into other markets, the Asian market and emerging markets. Have you found the growth much quicker in those markets than what it was initially in Australia?
Yes and no. There's been some very fast growth markets for us in Australia as well. Asia is certainly in a completely... I think in a period that the world is never going to see the like of again in terms of this mass growth in middle class, particularly in China and in some of the other countries in the region. And that's delivering a wealth of opportunities. But at the same time, while the growth is coming fast, you still have to actually make sure that you take the time to learn about that market. You can't assume that it actually works the same way as what you know. We made sure that we got really good advisors who could actually talk us through and walk that walk with us to make sure that we didn't just fall into the trap of kind of lobbing in and thinking just because something worked this way in Australia, it would work perfectly there, that we actually took the time again to form and to build those relationships. And there are some things that are just incredible about that where that rapid growth has just seen this leapfrog effect, where email is just not even really a thing in a lot of those countries. Everything's done on WhatsApp or WeChat, and it just Stuart's done transactions that have been purely over WhatsApp. And it's a much faster and more agile way of doing business, but at the same time, the interpersonal relationships are really important. So while the transactional pieces might be faster, the relationships might be a bit slower. So it's a bit of a balance. But again, it's that importance of taking the time to know what you don't know before you jump in too hard and too fast.
So it's got some wise words to end on, I think.